You see, there's something rather peculiar that happens when you begin to wake up. A subtle but profound shift in your perception of reality that alters everything. It's not like flipping a switch that suddenly floods a room with light. It's more like a slow, pre-dawn glow that gradually illuminates the landscape of your life, revealing shapes and forms you only vaguely sensed in the darkness. This awakening is a process of seeing, of understanding, and it begins when you stop playing the game of life quite so seriously, when the heavy stakes you once assigned to every interaction and outcome suddenly feel weightless. You start to perceive the inherent absurdity in our shared human condition, the intricate and often hilarious dance of identities we all perform. And this recognition is the first glimpse of the great cosmic joke. It's a joke not because life is meaningless, but because its deepest meaning is found in letting go of our desperate, white-knuckled grip on the narratives we believe define us. When this perspective takes root, you become, how shall I put it, inconvenient. You become a walking, breathing irritation to those who are still fast asleep, who are still clutching desperately to their roles, their masks, their carefully constructed and fiercely defended sense of who they think they are. It's crucial to understand that this isn't a deliberate act of rebellion on your part. You aren't setting out to be a troublemaker or a contrarian. Quite the opposite, in fact. You are simply being, you are breathing, you are walking through life with a certain lightness and freedom that comes from no longer fearing the judgment of others or the failure of your own persona. You move through the world unburdened by the baggage everyone else seems to be carrying, and this very lack of burden becomes your most noticeable, and to some, your most offensive characteristic. This newfound freedom, this palpable peace you carry within you, it disturbs something deep in others. It rattles the bars of their cages and they don't even know why. They just feel a vague sense of agitation in your presence, an unease they can't quite name. Have you noticed this phenomenon in your own life? You walk into a room feeling perfectly calm, perfectly friendly, with no agenda other than to be present, and someone looks at you as if you've just insulted their entire family lineage. You haven't uttered a single word. You haven't done anything wrong or offensive by any social standard, but your very presence, your energy, seems to set off some invisible, silent alarm in their nervous system. It's a primal alert, signaling that something in their environment does not compute, that a variable has entered the equation that threatens its stability. What is truly happening in these charged, silent moments? Why does the simple, unadorned peace you embody make them so viscerally uncomfortable? Why does your quiet refusal to play the familiar social games, the petty competitions, the subtle one-upmanship, the unspoken contracts of mutual complaining, cause such strange and sometimes hostile reactions? The answer is far more profound than a simple clash of personalities. It strikes at the very root of identity in the human ego. Well, let me tell you what's really going on beneath the surface of these awkward interactions and unexplained tensions. When you genuinely awaken, when you see through the grand and convincing illusion of the separate self, when you stop identifying with the ego and all its desperate, ceaseless demands for validation and security, you become a living mirror. And mirrors, as you know, can be terribly uncomfortable things to confront, especially when you aren't prepared to see your own reflection. They show people what they don't want to see. Not because the mirror is judgmental or cruel, but because it is impeccably honest. You are not judging them. You are not trying to make them feel small or inadequate. You are simply existing in a different way now, a way that operates from an entirely new set of rules, or perhaps from no rules at all, and that fundamental shift makes the ego in others very, very nervous. Your presence whispers a terrifying question to their subconscious. What if everything I've been striving for, defending and believing about myself is just a story? So let's talk about the 5 predictable ways people's egos will react to your awakening. Not so you can feel superior or spiritually elite, mind you. That would just be your own ego, sneaking back in through the side door wearing a disguise of enlightenment, completely missing the point of the journey. We discuss this so you can understand the mechanics of what's happening, so you can respond with compassion instead of confusion or defensiveness. This knowledge allows you to continue walking your path with grace and stability without being constantly thrown off balance or drawn back into the drama by these automatic, ego-driven reactions. It's about equipping yourself with understanding, not ammunition, so you can be a peaceful presence even in the face of unintended turbulence. The first reaction you will encounter is a demand for justification, an almost frantic need for you to explain yourself and your choices. When you stop defending your opinions, When you stop justifying your life choices with long, elaborate paragraphs of reasons designed to gain social approval, something strange and revealing happens. People get visibly upset, even angry. They demand explanations as if they are entitled to them. They want you to prove with evidence and logical arguments that you have a good and valid reason for living the way you live, for thinking the way you think, for being the way you are. You see, the ego is a creature of judgment. It loves to evaluate, to measure, to compare, to determine whether someone else's choices meet its own personal and often unspoken standards for acceptability. And when you refuse to play this game, when you don't offer your life up for inspection and approval, the ego in others feels robbed of its role. It feels as though you're being rude, unfair, even arrogant for not participating in the mutual validation society it relies upon. But here is the profound truth you have already glimpsed. You do not owe anyone an explanation for your existence. You do not need permission to be who you are. You do not have to justify your inner peace, your life choices, or your unique way of moving through the world to any external authority. When you were asleep, you probably spent enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy trying to make others understand you, trying to prove that you were living correctly, that your pain was valid, that your successes were deserved. But now you've seen through that exhausting trap. You've realized that no amount of explaining will ever satisfy the ego's insatiable hunger for control and categorization. So, what is the inevitable consequence? People become irritated. They accuse you of thinking you're better than them. They say you've become distant, cold, or difficult to reach, that you've built walls where there were none before. But you haven't changed in the way they think. You haven't become aloof or arrogant. You have simply stopped performing. You have stopped auditioning for a role in their personal drama, and you no longer need a director's approval for your performance in life. And the beautiful, liberating thing is, you don't need to argue about this either. You don't need to defend your refusal to defend yourself. You can simply smile, perhaps, a gentle, knowing smile, and go about your business with a quiet determination, like water flowing smoothly and persistently around a rock in a stream. The rock can complain all it wants about the water's path, it can grumble about its impertinence, but the water just keeps flowing, effortlessly, without resistance, on its way to the ocean. The second reaction you will face is a period of testing, a curious phase where people, often unconsciously, will probe and poke to see if your piece is real or just a facade. When people sense that you've found something, some kind of stability or clarity they haven't accessed, their ego often can't resist the urge to test its authenticity. It's like when you tell someone you're not bothered by criticism, and they immediately begin criticizing you to see if it's true. They poke at your boundaries. They prod at your sensitivities. They make comments and create situations designed specifically to get a reaction, to see the old you reappear. Why do they engage in this behavior? Because the ego in them wants to prove, for its own comfort, that you are just pretending, that you are putting on an act of enlightenment. It desperately wants to show that underneath your calm exterior, you are just as anxious, just as reactive, just as trapped in the same emotional patterns as they are. If they can get you to break, to lose your composure, to snap back at them with a familiar anger or defensiveness, then their ego can breathe a sigh of relief and dismiss what you represent. They can go back to sleep feeling justified, thinking, see, I knew it was all an act. We're all in the same boat of suffering after all. You might find people strategically bringing up old arguments that used to trigger you, mentioning sensitive topics they know once elicited a strong emotional response, or deliberately creating dilemmas designed to push your very specific historical buttons. A colleague at work might suddenly start nitpicking and criticizing everything you do, searching for a crack in your armor. A family member might bring up that one topic they know always started fights in the past, watching your face closely for a flicker of the old hurt or anger. A friend might make pointed comments about how you've changed, how you're not fun anymore, how you take yourself too seriously or, paradoxically, not seriously enough, all designed to provoke a defensive explanation. And here's what's truly marvelous about this entire dynamic. If you do react, if you get defensive or angry or visibly upset, their ego wins its petty victory. It gets to say, I knew it. You're not really at peace. You're just putting on an act, and now I've exposed you. But if you don't react, if you remain calm, present, and unprovoked, their ego becomes even more irritated and unsettled. Now it can't simply dismiss you. Now it has to face the unsettling, quiet possibility that what you have might be genuine, that this peace might be real and sustainable. and that is a far more threatening idea to its dominion. So what do you do in the face of these tests? You let them test. You let them poke and prod. Not because you're trying to prove a point or show off your spiritual strength, but because you genuinely aren't bothered anymore. You've seen through the dream of their provocation. You understand that their testing is just their own fear speaking, their own fragile ego trying to protect its constructed world from the possibility of its own dissolution. The third common reaction is the creation of gossip and stories. A narrative spun about you in your absence to explain your deviation from the norm. When you stop participating in the constant, low-grade drama of social life, when you consciously withdraw from gossiping, from complaining about trivialities, from playing the intricate games of social alliance and subtle betrayal, something interesting and almost inevitable happens. You become a prime subject of gossip yourself. People will begin to create stories about you to fill the vacuum of understanding. They'll whisper that you think you're better than everyone else. They'll speculate that you've become strange, disconnected from reality, too spiritual, or not grounded enough. They'll wonder aloud, what's wrong with you, and what happened to make you so different? They will discuss all of this behind your back, weaving elaborate theories and justifications for your behavior, creating a new identity for you that they can comprehend and often pity or ridicule. Why does this happen? Because the ego, in its endless need to make sense of the world, requires categorization. When someone steps outside the usual, well-trodden patterns of thought and behavior, the ego in others becomes deeply uncomfortable. It needs to label, to put you in a box it can understand, file away, and forget. And if it can't find a pre-existing box that fits your new way of being, it will create a new one from whole cloth. Usually, this box is designed to make you seem flawed, foolish, or profoundly misguided in some way that reassures them of their own normalcy. You might hear through the grapevine that people are saying you've had a nervous breakdown, that you're going through a phase, a midlife crisis, or that you've joined some weird, fringe spiritual cult. The specific stories will vary in their details and creativity, but they will all share one common, unifying theme. They are all attempts to explain away the radical shift in your being in a way that protects and reinforces their own worldview and choices. And here is the critical thing to internalize. You cannot stop this. You cannot control what others say and think about you. If you try, if you exhaust yourself by going around defending yourself, correcting the stories and trying to set the record straight, you will be pulled right back into the very drama you consciously stepped away from. You will be playing their game on their field, and you will always lose because the game is rigged. The awakened response, the only path to true freedom, is to let them talk. Let them create their stories. Let them gossip and theorize and worry about you to their heart's content. You must understand that their stories have nothing to do with the real you. Their stories are projections, manifestations of their own fears, their own resistance to change, their own unconscious unwillingness to question the game they are still so seriously playing. As the saying goes, what others think of you is none of your business. And in this context, it truly, profoundly isn't. You are not the character in the story they are writing. You are simply you, walking your path, being present, living with awareness. The rest is just noise, static on a frequency you have chosen to stop listening to. The fourth reaction, and often the most emotionally challenging, is when people try to pull you back into old patterns and dynamics, especially those who have known you for a long time. This one can be particularly tricky and can tug on your heartstrings because it involves family members, old friends, and loved ones who knew and interacted with the you that existed before you woke up. They remember the old you vividly, the you who played the social games without question, who got upset about the same things they got upset about, who participated willingly in all the usual family or friend group dramas, and now you have undeniably changed. You don't react the same way to triggers. You don't get pulled into the same cyclical arguments. You don't play your familiar assigned role in the family dynamic or the social hierarchy, and this deviation from your script makes them deeply uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable, because your change challenges the stability of the entire system. So what do, often without even realizing it? They try to pull you back into the fold. They'll bring up old memories, trying to nostalgically remind you of who you really are. They'll invite you, through word and action, into the old familiar patterns of relating. They'll create situations where you are fully expected to play your old part. And if you don't, if you remain in your new calm center, they will express genuine hurt, confusion, or frustration. A parent might say, with palpable sadness, "You used to tell me everything. What happened to our relationship?" A friend might complain, "You're not the same person anymore. You've lost your sense of humor. You're no fun." A sibling might accuse you of thinking you're too good for the family now, a cutting remark designed to trigger guilt and compliance. Your transformation is a living, breathing suggestion that maybe, just maybe, others could change too. And that is a profoundly frightening thought for the ego, which equates change with death. Change means uncertainty. Change means the comfortable, predictable patterns that have defined relationships for decades might not hold. So they resist your personal evolution by trying to coax, guilt, or force you back into being the person they remember, the person their ego knows how to relate to. But you cannot go back. Even if a part of you wanted to, out of love or a desire for harmony, you couldn't. It would be an act, a performance. Once you've seen through the illusion, once you've tasted the real freedom of an unconstructed self, the old ways of being feel like ill-fitting costumes, constricting and inauthentic. You can love these people deeply. You can be exceptionally kind and patient with them. You can spend quality time with them. But you cannot, and must not, pretend to be someone you're not anymore just to make them comfortable, for that is a betrayal of your own awakening. So what do? You remain present. You remain loving and compassionate, but you consciously and consistently do not take the bait. When they try to pull you into an old argument, you don't engage in the battle. When they try to make you feel guilty for your growth, you don't defend or justify your journey. You simply are who you are now, calmly and consistently, and you trust that either they will, over time, adjust to this new way of relating, or they won't. And either way, you must find the inner strength to continue steadily on your own path, honoring your truth without demanding that they understand it. The fifth and most subtle reaction is a simple, palpable feeling of discomfort that people will experience in your presence. A silent agitation that speaks volumes. When you've genuinely awakened, when you're no longer identified with the ego and all its performative games, your very presence, your energy, becomes a source of discomfort for those who are still deeply asleep. It's not that you're doing anything wrong or acting strangely. It's not that you're judging them or looking down on them or trying to make them feel bad in any way. In fact, you might be more tamed, more present, more genuinely interested in listening to them than you ever were before. Yet, something about your energy, your quiet and settled way of being makes them subtly squirm. Why is this? Because consciousness itself is contagious. When you are fully present, when you are not caught up in the constant, frantic chatter of the mind, when you are simply being in the moment, it creates a powerful space around you, a space of stillness, a space of pure, non-judgmental awareness. And in that silent, spacious field, other people's internal ego chatter becomes suddenly, glaringly loud to them. They become acutely aware, even if only on a subconscious level, of the noise in their own heads. They become aware of their own underlying anxiety, their own restlessness, their own constant low-grade need to be somewhere else, doing something else, being someone else. Your inner peace acts as a flawless mirror for their internal chaos. Your stillness reflects their own agitation back at them with unnerving clarity. And instead of using this reflection as an opportunity to look inward and question their own way of being, the ego's first and automatic instinct is to externalize the discomfort and blame you for causing it. It's your fault they feel this unsettled feeling. You're too serious. You're too calm. You're too quiet. Something must be wrong with you if you're not as perpetually anxious, busy, and worried as they are. You might notice that people don't want to sit with you in comfortable silence. They feel compelled to fill every quiet gap with nervous chatter. They might ask you, with concern, "What are you thinking?" Or "Is something wrong?" Or "Why are you so quiet?" They misinterpret your peaceful presence as a form of silent judgment or disapproval, when it is, in reality, simply a state of presence. They project onto you their own deep-seated discomfort with stillness, with silence, with the simple, unadorned act of just being. And here lies the beautiful central paradox of this entire dynamic. The very thing that makes them uncomfortable, your awakened presence, is exactly what they most need to encounter. Your stillness is a silent invitation for them to be still. Your peace offers them the tangible possibility that they, too, could find peace. Your freedom shows them, without a single lecture, that freedom is not just a philosophical concept, but a living, attainable state. But the ego resists this silent invitation with every weapon in its arsenal, because accepting it would mean its own dissolution. It would mean letting go of all the games, all the stories, all the desperate, lifelong attempts to prove its own solid and separate existence. So, as a result, some people will simply start to avoid you. They'll make excuses not to spend time with you. They'll gradually drift away from your life, and that's okay. You cannot force anyone to wake up. You cannot drag them kicking and screaming into awareness. All you can do is be steadfastly who you are, a beacon of what is possible, and trust that those who are ready, whose souls are yearning for something more, will be naturally drawn to the light you represent. Others might directly accuse you of being judgmental or aloof, even though you are not judging them at all. They feel judged simply by being in the presence of someone who has stopped playing the foundational game of judgment and comparison. Your very existence, your way of being, quietly questions their life choices even though you haven't said a single word about them. This is the mechanism of projection in its purest form. They are judging themselves, their own choices, their own anxieties. And then they are projecting that internal judgment outward onto you, making you the critical one in their story. The only awakened response to this is deep compassion, because you remember with crystal clarity what it was like to be asleep. You remember the constant gnawing anxiety, the perpetual need to defend your fragile self-image, the utterly exhausting game of trying to be somebody important, loved, and successful. You remember how unsettling, how strangely threatening it was to be around anyone who seemed to have found a genuine peace you were still desperately and often hopelessly seeking, so you do not take their discomfort personally. You do not make their reactions mean anything about your worth or the validity of your path. You simply continue to be present, to be kind, to be available if they ever want to talk authentically, or simply sit in silence together, allowing the space to do its own quiet work. Now here is what is absolutely crucial to understand about all 5 of these ego reactions. They are not, in their essence, about you at all. They are about the other person's internal, and often unconscious, relationship with their own ego. When you awaken, you become a clean, clear mirror for the world. And what people see reflected in that mirror is not you. It is a reflection of themselves. They see their own unfaced fears, their own resistance to life, their own fierce attachment to the particular game they are playing. Some individuals will look into this mirror and feel inspired, curious, even hopeful. They'll want to know what you've discovered. They'll ask sincere questions. They'll be drawn to the peace you seem to carry so naturally. These are the ones who are already ripe, who are beginning to stir from their own slumber. They recognize in you something their soul has been secretly searching for, even if their conscious mind doesn't yet have the words for what that is. But others will look into the same mirror and feel profoundly threatened, and they will react in one or more of the ways we have discussed. They will demand explanations to reestablish control, test you to prove your authenticity as a sham, gossip about you to create a manageable narrative, try to pull you back into old patterns to restore their comfort, or simply feel an unexplained discomfort around you that they will blame you for causing. All of this is simply the ego's sophisticated defense mechanism, its way of protecting its fragile existence from the terrifying and liberating possibility of its own transcendence. The woman who glares at you with inexplicable hostility in the grocery store is not truly seeing you. She is seeing her own internal discomfort reflected back at her through your peaceful presence. The colleague who constantly criticizes your work is not really responding to the quality of what you do. He is responding to what your calm, unhurried way of being implicitly says about his own frantic, stress-filled approach to life. The family member who accuses you of thinking you're better than everyone is not really talking about you or your character. They are giving voice to their own deep-seated insecurity, their own unarticulated fear that they are not enough, and their terror that the family structure they rely upon might be changing. First and foremost, you must remember this truth in every interaction. It is not personal. It is a universal, predictable dynamic of projection. Second, you make a conscious choice to remain compassionate, because you know from direct experience that being asleep is its own form of suffering. You know intimately what it feels like to be trapped in the ego's cramped and dusty cage, to feel that constant low-grade anxiety, to always be defending yourself against some imagined threat or slight. So when people react to you in these patterned ways, you learn to see it for what it truly is, a silent cry for help, a desperate, automatic attempt to maintain the only sense of self they have ever known, a self that is perpetually at war with reality. Third, you must not, under any circumstances, dim your own light to make others more comfortable. This is a crucial point on the path. You might feel tempted, out of a misplaced sense of kindness, or a desire to avoid conflict, to go back to playing some of the old games, to pretend you are still asleep just to fit in, just to make the waves around you subside. But this compromise does not serve anyone in the long run, least of all yourself. Your light, your awakened presence, is a gift to the world even when, and especially when, it makes people uncomfortable, because that discomfort is often the first, necessary step toward their own questioning, their own seeking, their own eventual waking up. Fourth, you learn to trust the process of awakening itself without trying to control the outcomes. You understand that this profound shift in consciousness is not something you can give to anyone else as a present. They have to find it for themselves, within themselves. Your primary job in this life is not to wake anyone else up. It is simply to be fully, completely awake yourself. And in being awake, in living consistently from that place of deep presence and unconditional peace, you offer a living possibility to all you encounter. You become a walking, breathing demonstration that another way of existing is available. A way free from suffering. What others choose to do with that embodied possibility, whether they embrace it, ignore it, or fight against it, is entirely up to them and their own journey's timing. And fifth, and perhaps most importantly, you keep your sense of humor about the whole, magnificent, ridiculous situation. Goodness, really, isn't it all rather funny when you step back and look at it? The great cosmic joke of it all. Here we are, all fundamentally the same consciousness, pretending with immense seriousness to be separate, isolated individuals. Egos, which are ultimately insubstantial, fighting with other insubstantial egos. All of us at times completely forgetting that we are the one thing looking at itself through a billion different pairs of eyes. When you see this, when you really get the joke in your bones, you can't help but laugh, a gentle, inclusive laugh. Not at others, but with a deep recognition of our shared predicament. Because we are all, every single one of us, actors in this ridiculous, beautiful, and profoundly mysterious play together. You see, the irritation and discomfort people feel around you is not a problem you need to solve or a fire you need to put out. It is an intrinsic part of the awakening process itself, part of how consciousness expands and evolves. It's part of how awakening spreads through a culture, not through proselytizing, but through resonance. One person wakes up, and their mere presence creates subtle but powerful ripples in the collective field. Some people will feel those ripples and surf them joyfully toward their own awakening. Others will resist them, build emotional walls against them, and pretend they don't feel the vibration, but the ripples continue to expand outward regardless. The presence continues to shine. The light continues to emanate, touching everything in its path. And here's the final beautiful secret. The more you stop caring about these egoic reactions, the more you release any need for others to understand or approve of you, the more potent and effective your presence becomes. When you are secretly trying to prove something, trying to convince others of your peace, trying to make them see what you see, you are still, in a subtle way, caught in the ego's game of achievement and validation. But when you simply are, when you live your life with authenticity and peace without any hidden agenda, without any need for a specific outcome, that is when the real magic and transformation occur. Because then you are not playing the game at all. You're not trying to win. You're not defending a position. You're not even trying to wake anyone up. You are just being. And pure being is the most powerful transformative force in the world. Being is what the ego cannot ultimately withstand. Being is what gradually, gently dissolves all the games, all the stories, all the desperate, frantic attempts to be somebody special and separate. So let them react. Let them demand their explanations. Let them test your composure. Let them gossip and weave their tales. Let them try to pull you back into the familiar past. Let them feel uncomfortable in your radiant presence. It is all part of the divine dance. It is all part of the endless unfolding play of consciousness. And you just keep being present, aware, and free. You walk through the world with the effortless resilience of water flowing around rocks, with the intangible freedom of wind moving through trees, with the illuminating power of light piercing darkness, not forcing anything, not resisting anything, simply flowing, simply being. And in that simple, profound state of being, you offer the most powerful teaching of all, a teaching that transcends language and ideology, the teaching that has no words, the teaching that cannot be captured in a book or a lecture, the teaching that quietly irritates every ego it encounters, because it demonstrates, without saying a single word, that the emperor has no clothes, that the game we are all playing with such seriousness and sacrifice is just a game, And that underneath all the roles, the masks, the dramas, and the stories, there is simply this eternal presence, this silent awareness, this boundless being. And that, my friends, is quite